Please welcome to the Creative Mornings Charlotte stage, Mark O'Connor, everybody. Come on up, Mark.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that. And it's great to be here this morning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my memoir and what it's about. All of this for me in music started at a very young age. And for years, I wanted to write this story. And I just, didn't either have the time or the voice to really write this special story, because it's a unique one about a creative child in music. And it's a roadmap really to inspiration. And I used American music to get me there. American music, matter of fact, the piece that we played, and Matt had mentioned this earlier in the program, about the myriad, the multiplicity of musical styles that create American music. And just that alone, cross-pollinating these things have been really instrumental in creating so many musical styles that we all love all over the world. Over the last 150, 200 years, American music has been become that foundation of musical influence. And I think there's a big reason for that, because it's so creative and it involves community. It really reminds me a lot of what we are all about here this morning. It's not just a few master composers, who have a talent and dictating the way. It really, it emanates from a community of people from all walks of life creating the music. So, for instance, when I'm playing Bob Wills' Faded Love, I'm not just thinking about him, who's also, fantastic songwriter, but he's getting the language. He's bringing in the musical language. Speaking of mariachi, there wouldn't be Bob Wills and Western swing music without the Mexican-American influence in music. The ranchero, and you mentioned, Matt, you must have read some pages out of my O'Connor Method book, because I love talking about that. The German polka ends up in what is now modern day Texas, the early 1800s. That fuses with the Aztec music and the Spanish violin and guitar, becoming ranchero and mariachi. And then Bob Wills comes along and creates Western swing using that musical influence, plus the jazz out of Kansas City and Chicago, and so forth. So when I'm up here playing Faded Love, I'm thinking about this incredible history of music. And I want kids to be able to know about this and to, study an instrument still. I mean, I think in our culture, music has been such an important progressive cornerstone in developing our freedom, our democracy, and our way of life that I think has inspired the world. I also played Faded Love the very first time I stepped on stage. I was 12 years old at the Grand Ole Opry. And Roy Acuff, the king of country music, put me on stage that night. My story is really unusual because I come from Seattle and far away from the cradle of fiddle music, for sure. There was a Texas fiddler named Benny Thomason, a legend, and he had retired up there. And I think there's probably some pictures here. There's Benny right behind me looking at me play. Right there on the left. And there's Roy Acuff on the right side of the picture. I'm 13 years old there, playing for them. My story is about learning music from American music legends. I was the first child on a national scale playing this kind of music in the 1970s. That's the story and the era that this takes place. The 1970s, a cultural rich era where music was exploding in the American scene, from rock and roll, the beginning of festivals, really. When they were introduced in the 60s, but they really took flight in the 70s, the beginning of a bluegrass festival. It was the height of fiddle contests, the biggest prize money ever offered, and the dynamics of the old timers competing against the 40 and 50-year-old mature musicians trying to take their trophy away. And then there's this kid coming out of Seattle at 12 and 13 playing their music toe to toe with them. This happened because I was a prodigious child in music, but I was mentored. I was mentored by Benny Thomason, who took me under his wing, and he spent hours and hours with me. The idea of mentoring is so important in the creative process. I'm going to read a little bit about just an excerpt from my memoir, Crossing Bridges. And this is in the chapter, Summer of Fiddling Love. And this is when I showed up in Nashville for the first time. My mother, who was dying of cancer, drove me across the country in our new yellow Econoline van, hollowed out with no air conditioning in the summertime. Here's the response I write about. By the way, I wrote this book during the pandemic, so I had enough isolation to figure out how to write this story. 10 years ago, I attempted to write it with a co-writer, a wonderful biographer. It just didn't, it didn't find my voice in it, and I scrapped it. And I wondered if I could ever get to the point to tell this story. So this is really an amazing release for me, Here's from the book. What was most unusual for the folks listening, though, was that I didn't hail from a southern state such as Tennessee, a place where this kind of fiddling was prevalent. Equally, they were bewildered that I didn't come from a family tradition of musicians playing this kind of music. Most of them who played it were born into it. My biography was entirely new for them. Even though my mother and I couldn't have known just how much of a rarity it was to see a kid fiddler in the South, which became absolutely clear over the course of the evening, if not the entire summer of 1974. I brought with me a completely different set of life circumstances and experiences, which led me to my own brand of American fiddling. All of them were responding to this. The matter of my having played fiddle for just over a year and a half did not make itself scarce either. That little tidbit bolted through the assemblage like a scalded cat. Despite such little time on the instrument, I was being transported here, just like I had dreamed about. Amid all the commotion, there were moments where my mind wandered off, times where I was doing some heart searching of my own. I had to pinch myself. Was this really me right here, right now? The boy who all these professional musicians were praising up and down, is this the same awkward kid who was the laughingstock at school just a few months ago? The effigy bullseye for all their flung away darts. The object of constant and inexorable bullying. Was I the same boy who was just one fiddle contest away from working child labor for my dad every day after school, under the houses with the rats and the snakes, instead of getting to practice? The kind of practice that got me to this very night. On this night, there was an intangibility about it all. I was asked about all these things from the very nice people, things they wondered about, like my life back home. Sometimes I just stood there in place, listening to them pay me compliments, but I'd zone out on them. I didn't really focus in on what they were saying to me at times. Couldn't they tell that we were nobodies? Or worse, that we were poor misfits? While all these people praised my musical abilities, I was flashing back, remembering how I was in so much danger that year. So many times there was such danger because people really disliked me in my neighborhood, at my school. Part of me hurt so much to think about what my actual life was like. So my story is about finding creativity as a young child and using that to transport me out of a bad place, imagining a better place to be. And I could do it through the music I was playing and learning. And my story continues. And today, I get to play music for a living. That was one of the biggest things that was happening to me. When I first won the national fiddling championships as a young boy, and then the national guitar championships, and then the national mandolin, it was unprecedented. It's still the youngest person to do it, even to this day, even though there's an incredibly amount of young people playing, thankfully. But I was really the first one to come along in these genres. But my story also is about planting the creative seeds, because I was, like many prodigies, probably ready to burn out. And it was really finding those seeds and growing them and doing it on my own. And that led me to all these different genres of music. I found jazz, I found Stefan Grappelli, I found rock fusion music. I ended up playing with David Grisman Quintet as a teenager, the Dregs as a teenager, Merle Haggard at 15 took me under his wing, and he's the one that nominated me to have a command performance at the White House the very first time in front of President Ronald Reagan as a teen. Today, I put all of these efforts into composing music and authoring this method to share with prospective students the magic of American music and its history, and how it involves communities coming together to create something very special. Matter of fact, right here in Charlotte, my wife Maggie and I moved here 6 years ago, and we've put on the local O'Connor Method String Camp, and we hold it at Myers Park Baptist Church, and it's the last week of July. And it's open to all ages, all levels, because I have a book 1 and a book 2 all the way through. So we have teachers and we're teaching. It's wonderful. And we create a community that looks a lot like this, but you guys got fiddles under your chins. We're going to perform Sunday night at the Blumenthal Booth Theater, and it will be the Crossing Bridges Memoir concert. We're going to do a retrospective of early music that I was learning from these musical legends. And we'll give you a few tidbits of some things Maggie and I are working on now. And we'd love to have you come and attend that concert. It's going to be a part of a long tour of Crossing Bridges all across the country. We're going to go up north next to Boston and New York, and out west to Seattle, my hometown, and California. And I wanted to read another excerpt. This is when I'm about 15 now, right there, right on cue. So there I am playing with David Grisman and Tony Rice, some of the legends in acoustic music in America. And I'm 15 right there, sitting in with that old painted white fiddle. was about this time, though, that I was burning out. And it was really creativity that kept me in. And I demanded to do it and find it. I was a part of a very dysfunctional household, dying mother, cancer, alcoholic father who was abusive, bullying at school. And I had it. I was also had a lot of pressure to bring money home from music as a child prodigy. And I was done with it. And this is the part of the story about in the middle of the book where I'll pick up here. And I found an unlikely source of inspiration. From the chapter, Boarding the Blues Away. Prayers were answered that contained Dad to the downstairs floor in the evening tirades. After our new living arrangement, he didn't come upstairs looking for her. Never took his rage past the threshold of the downstairs doorway. Otherwise, it was like dealing with some wild animal caged in. He yelled and cussed up the staircase sometimes for an hour or more straight. The delirium was always quite frightening. But this became routine, predictable. The three of us stayed disciplined under my guidance and didn't respond to him during those nightly histrionics. Eventually, each night, he would wear himself out with the yelling, his voice itself giving out. When I finally had mastered the nature of his drunken routine, I could put on my headphones and listen to jazz rock music, loud enough to drown out his threatening language towards my mother, while she herself listened to his every word and was made to swallow it. It was all quite merciless, as if Dad already was spending every last penny on her future cancer treatment. Without health insurance, there was little doubt what was ahead. During those years, it seemed that we could barely get through this unending praxis. I never had to threaten my dad's life with a weapon, though, as Mom insisted I should be prepared to do. Mark, you have not touched your instruments in months, Mother scolded. Yeah, well, I don't feel like it. I just want a board, I replied defiantly. After all you've done with your music, the least you could do is practice once in a while, Mom reminded me. But something even haughtier was stewing inside me. At this point, all I was doing was skateboarding and listening to jazz records. These were my two escapes at age 15. I was taking in everything from traditional jazz, Stéphane Grappelli, Django Reinhardt and the Hot Club of France, Joe Venuti and Eddie Lang, Charlie Christian, Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, Pat Martino, Oscar Peterson, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, all the way to contemporary jazz rock artists like Jean-Luc Ponty, John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Wayne Shorter, Jaco Pastorius, and Weather Report, Chick Corea, Al Di Meola, Stanley Clark, and Return to Forever, Pat Metheny, and Steve Morse with the Dixie Dregs. For contemporary acoustic music that year, I was particularly into Schottky, with John McLaughlin on his scalloped fret guitar, and the East Indian violinist L. Shankar, as well as the new David Grisman Quintet album with Tony Rice on it. The tape fresh off the rack and into my new headphones. When I let Dad try my pair of phones, he couldn't believe it. He was bewildered by this technology. The look of bafflement on his face over where the music was coming from around his head was pretty funny. It was a feast for my ears, too. I was approaching music on my own and on my own terms, getting plenty of musical nourishment by listening to my jazz records. How I went from Texas fiddle contests and bluegrass festivals to a broad array of jazz music as a kid could be considered somewhat remarkable. I was passionately developing a taste for a broader range of musical genres. I wasn't about to leave my prior music behind completely. It has always been second nature for me to compartmentalize. My instinct for keeping track of instruments, styles, and musical language was synchronal. I looked at all of it within the bounds of possibility. Once I could obtain something musically, it went straight into my repository. The split personality indications of my real life existence, just to make it through the day, easily carried through to music. Even as a younger child, I relied on it, given school and given my home life. Not many people around me understood what I was doing at age 15, but not many people did before. Now that the pressure was off with regards to making a living as a kid musician and moving my family to Nashville, I felt like I could do whatever I wanted to. That was other than being our home's night watchman. 1977 was a musically freeing year, even if I wasn't touching the instruments with my own hands, as Mom demurred. And the skateboard? Well, my boards became the very essence of my own animating spirit. Skateboarding the streets of the suburbs in Seattle was going to save this kid's heart and mind. As a child performer, I had already been through more than a family could bargain for. I already dealt with a lot of dysfunctional domestic abuse, problems at school, and some bizarre behavior on the road. I demanded some independence and extrication from the recent responsibilities. I was skateboarding and listening to music nonstop. Rounder Records called again, and they want a new album from you. This is the third time they've called. What do you want me to tell them, Mom asked earnestly. Tell them I don't feel like making an album. In a nutshell, was pretty much all I did anymore. Skateboard after school until dark, and then lay on my bed with my new gigantic set of headphones and listen to jazz, tuning out Dad and Mom, tuning out the rest of the world. That year, I came to a full understanding that this particular activity, skateboarding, was perfectly suited for my railing against the establishment and the status quo confines. So to say the boarding was my hobby would be a gross cheapening of the daily quest. Skating was my new way of life. I breathed it, thirsted over it, and would do about anything to skateboard every day. I was so disheartened each time the rain came, putting a stop to riding my board. In Seattle, dampness was unfortunately typical. Boarding had become my way of life and key to my mental survival, as long as the ground was dry, that is. It also helped me outmaneuver that childhood musician life I felt was hopefully in the past. I was needing to do most anything to get past it. I began to see everything like a skateboarder might view the world, a rebel who was misunderstood by elders and misunderstood by most other kids, which of course aligned with my narrative of the child musician. In the mid-70s, skateboarding was not at all popular with the vast amount of kids. It was more like a hobby for beatniks and misfits. Beyond that, the activity was quite scarce in Seattle otherwise, compared to Southern California. Just a few of us punks skating against the suburban machine in the Pacific Northwest. Rounder called again and said that if you were not interested in a recording on a fiddle album, would you be interested in a guitar album? Since you won the national guitar contest at Winfield for a second time, my mother goaded me. If it wasn't for that transition period where I was allowed to think about my future, even as a child, and step away and get another perspective, I wouldn't have found the ability to play jazz guitar, therefore audition for Stephen Grappelli as his guitarist, and then play duets with Stephen Grappelli at Carnegie Hall at 18 years old. I'm going to have my wife come up and join me, a tribute to Stephen Grappelli, minor swing, and a tune of mine that I play and have written in his style, Gypsy Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Stefan Grappelli. So we have memoirs here. These photos are also from the companion photo book. And also there's a companion CD, Early Childhood Recordings. They're all out there, and Maggie and I will be out there. We'll do book signing if you're interested. And we hope to see some of you there. And I hope you enjoy this book. Spent 2 years writing it, and I think it's an original American story. Like I said, a roadmap to inspiration. And I hope it inspires you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Matt. Creative Mornings.